All right, let's dive in. Today, we're putting on our detective hats. We're going to go behind the scenes and investigate the investigators themselves to figure out, how does science actually find the truth when there's just mountains of conflicting evidence out there?
I mean, you've seen it, right? It feels like this giant scientific Tower of Babel. One day a study says coffee is a superfood, the next day it's going to kill you. This new management technique is a game changer, until another study comes out and says, not really. So how in the world are we supposed to cut through all that noise?
Well, there's this incredible tool called a meta-analysis, and you can just think of it as a super study. Instead of just looking at one piece of the puzzle, it zooms out. It systematically gathers and analyzes all the studies on a topic. It's like this powerful searchlight that cuts through the fog and shows you the entire landscape, revealing the big picture that any single study could easily miss. Okay, so here's our roadmap. We're going to look at what used to be the gold standard, then walk through the foundational stages of a modern study. We'll see why it's so important to go beyond just the average, why open science is a total game changer, and finally, how we keep our scientific understanding up to date.
So first up, you gotta understand that science isn't static. It's always evolving. The methods for doing these super studies, they're constantly getting better. So what was considered a top-notch A+ approach even just 10 years ago might look kind of dated today.
And this quote right here, it just nails it. This is the big twist in our detective story. The goalposts are always on the move. To find the real truth today, our scientific detectives need to be using the latest and greatest tools in the shed.
And you can really see that evolution right here. So a decade ago, a researcher might have used a tool called fail-safe-n to look for what's known as publication bias. That's the sneaky problem where journals love to publish exciting, positive results, but the boring studies where nothing happened, they get stuffed in a file drawer. Fail-safe-n was, well, it was a pretty crude guess. But today, we have these incredible forensic tools with names like pet peas that don't just guess. They can actually detect the statistical fingerprints of those missing studies and correct the results. That's a huge leap forward.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty, the first couple of stages of a modern investigation. Just like any good detective, the first job is to gather all the evidence, all the individual studies, and then you gotta clean it up to make sure it's reliable. This foundation, it's everything.
The very first hurdle is a big one. Researchers call it the construct identity fallacy. Just imagine trying to track down a suspect who uses like a dozen different aliases. That's what scientists are up against. The exact same idea might be called team cohesion in one paper, group morale in another, and work unit solidarity in a third. It takes some serious expertise to find all the clues. And a truly thorough search means you've got to dodge all these hidden traps. It's not about what's easy. A good researcher has to fight these biases. They're hunting down unpublished work, finding ways around paywalls, looking into completely different fields, and even translating studies from other languages. It's all about getting that complete picture.
Okay, so once all that evidence is piled up, stage 2 kicks in, cleaning the data. And this is way more than just crunching numbers. It's about meticulously inspecting every single piece of evidence, looking for anything that seems, well, a little bit off. These are the outliers, the rogue data points that can potentially change everything.
So that begs the question, right? How much damage or influence can just one single, unusual, rogue study have on the final conclusion? You might be surprised.
Let's look at a real case. This is a meta-analysis on whether cultural diversity helps or hurts team creativity. So when the researchers crunched all the numbers, they found a small positive relationship, an effect size of plus 0.18. But it wasn't statistically significant, which is just a fancy way of saying the result could have been a fluke. So case closed, right? Not so fast. The investigators dug a little deeper, and they noticed something odd. There was one study from way back in 1999 that really stood out. Not only was it the biggest study in the whole dataset, but it was the only one that found a negative link between diversity and creativity. It was dragging the whole average down. So, check this out. What happens when they transparently run the analysis again, but this time without that one single outlier? the result changes, and I mean dramatically. The effect size jumps all the way to plus 0.29, and boom, now it is statistically significant. It just goes to show how critical it is to spot these influential studies and to report the results both ways, with and without them. And that's the perfect lead-in to stage 3. See, a modern meta-analysis doesn't just stop at finding one single average number. The real mission is to understand the why. Why do the results look different from one study to the next? It's about uncovering the full story, not just the headline.
I mean, this quote from Bornstein just says it all. If you only report the average, you're missing the most fascinating part of the story. The real gold is in the variation, why some studies found a really strong effect and others found almost nothing. That's often where the biggest discoveries are just waiting to be found. Yeah, think of it this way. The average effect is like putting a single dot on a map for a city. But the real detective work? That's exploring all the different neighborhoods, understanding the full range of what's actually possible out there in the real world. So let's go back to our diversity example. The average finding was plus 0.29, but look at this credibility interval. That's the predicted range of effects you'd likely see in the real world. And it shows that the true effect could be as low as plus 0.03, basically nothing, or as high as plus 0.55, which is a really strong, meaningful effect. The story is just so much richer than that one little number. So why the huge range? Well, that variation, it's not noise. It's a clue. It tells our scientific detectives to start hunting for moderators. These are the specific conditions that change the outcome. So, for example, maybe diversity only really sparks creativity in teams with fantastic leadership or when the task is super complex. Finding those conditions is how you get to real practical advice. And, when they start digging for these complex relationships, things can get, well, a little messy. To test these bigger ideas, researchers sometimes have to build what they colorfully call a Frankenstein matrix, literally stitching together bits and pieces of data from dozens of different studies. And if you're not super careful, you can end up with a monster of nonsensical data. It takes some serious skill to bring that creation to life correctly. All right, let's bring it home with the final stage of the investigation. Once all the analysis is done, the job isn't over. A modern super study has to be presented in a way that is completely transparent and actually useful for the next generation of scientific detectives. And this is where the game has really changed. The old way of doing things, saying data available upon request, well, that often led to dead ends and lost computer files. Today, the standard is full transparency. You detail every single decision you made, and, this is the big one, you publish your entire database in a public open science archive. That lets anyone come in, check your work, reanalyze it, and build on it. That's how science is supposed to work. And that leads us to a really important final point. Science never really sleeps. It's a living, breathing process. Even the most amazing, comprehensive meta-analysis has a shelf life. So when is it time to reopen a classic case? The future here might be something really cool called a living systematic review. Instead of a static report that's pretty much out of date the second it's published, these are designed to be dynamic. They can be continuously updated as new studies come out. It's a way to make sure our scientific knowledge actually keeps up with the fire hose of new evidence. So, how do we know when it's time for an update? It really boils down to 3 simple questions. 1, is the topic still relevant for team diversity? Absolutely. 2, is there a lot of new evidence or maybe even better methods available? We've already seen that's a big yes. And 3, could this new information actually change the conclusion? We saw how just one outlier did exactly that. It's a pretty clear-cut case for reopening the investigation. So now you know the anatomy of a super study. The next time you see a headline that says, "A scientific review finds X," you're going to be able to think like a detective. You won't just take the headline at face value. You'll start to wonder, what about the investigation behind it? Was it transparent? Did they use modern tools? Did they look beyond just the average? And asking those kinds of critical questions, well, that's what science is all about.